Well, good morning to our friends in the West, and good afternoon in Europe, and good evening to those of you who are participating in the webinar from Asia. My name is David Adelman. I'm Managing Director and General Counsel here at KraneShares, and we are delighted to bring a very special program to you, a discussion with former U.S. Ambassador to China, Terry Branstad. Before we begin the conversation, a few thank yous. First, a big thanks to our friends and partners at BTIG, who I know have promoted this webinar with their network of friends. By way of housekeeping, there is a 1-hour CIMA and CFP credit available for this participation in this webinar. You can apply for those credits by emailing ce@kraneshares.com. So continuing education, ce@kraneshares.com. We're going to have a conversation with Ambassador Branstad for a few minutes, but my intention this morning is to field as many of your questions as possible. You can submit your questions by email at info@kraneshares.com, or if you're participating in this webinar through Zoom, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Today's program is one in a series of programs we have done over many years now here at KraneShares. We've been honored to host former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, one of Ambassador Branstad's predecessors as the U.S. Ambassador in Beijing, Max Baucus, former secretaries of the United States Navy, National Security Council, staffers, academics, and of course, business leaders of both U.S. and Chinese businesses. A little bit about KraneShares. We are a $10 billion ETF platform here in New York. We are best known for our expertise and, in fact, are the leading firm on Wall Street with expertise in China. We publish every night, overnight, a very widely read email newsletter called China Last Night. And if you look at the top of your screen, there's a QR code. If you're not already subscribed to China Last Night, please just use this QR code. Sign up. It's the first thing I read every morning. It is published and authored by our team, led by our Chief Investment Officer, Brendan Ahern. KraneShares is a firm that was founded on the principle that the growth of China will be the great story of the 21st century. Our founder, John Crane, had a very simple business thesis, and that is that global investors needed a way to properly calibrate their exposure to the Chinese growth story, and that China, in fact, should be its own asset class. It's actually a business thesis that seems almost elementary today with all of the dynamism in China over the last 10 or 15 years, but at the time, it was really considered innovative. Since our founding now more than a decade ago, we have developed a suite of products, all offered on the New York Stock Exchange, that provide to investors different ways to realize responsible exposure to the Chinese growth story. Our flagship fund, of course, is KWEB. It's approximately $7 billion under management today, and it's often seen on news outlets as the benchmark for China growth. We have certain structured products around KWEB, buffered products, products that allow for principal protection. We also have other funds that provide specific exposure to China's healthcare sector, to electric vehicles, to green technology, and you can see some of the tickers on your screen right now. We have another thematic suite of products, and that relates to carbon credits and the compulsory or carbon allowance market. Our flagship fund in carbon is KRBN, and today it is the largest carbon fund listed, publicly listed. And then we have another group of non-correlated ETFs that provide different special exposures based on expertise that we have here at KraneShares and expertise that we bring in through partners and various sub-advisors. So let me move on to today's very exciting discussion, a conversation with a former United States ambassador to China, former longtime governor of the state of Iowa, my friend and a friend and partner of KraneShares, Ambassador Terry Branstad. Terry comes to us today from his home office in Des Moines. Welcome, Terry.
Thank you, David. Great to be with you. As you know, you and I have done a number of these at different locations throughout the world, and I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to share the latest developments on the U.S.-China relationship, which has changed a lot here in just the last couple of days.
It has. And Terry, I think there's no one in the world in a better position to talk to investors about how to best think about all of the back and forth, not just on trade, but on capital flows and sort of other economic and security related issues with China. You're unique in the sense that you are someone that both President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump call a friend. You've known Xi Jinping since you first met him in 1985. And of course, you've been a political supporter of Donald Trump since he entered national electoral politics. So a unique perspective. And before we get into the events of the last couple of days, or maybe even before we get into the events that began on April 2nd with the announcement of the far-ranging tariffs by the Trump administration, maybe you can just talk to us a little bit about, based on your experience in the first term of the of the Trump administration, how Donald Trump thinks about China. What's his frame of mind, and sort of how that has taken him on this journey towards a more confrontational trade approach towards Beijing?
Well, many years ago, Trump wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. And he is a businessman who is interested in getting a better deal for America. His theme has been the idea that America has not been treated fairly, and he wants fairness and reciprocity in trade, not just with China, with other countries in the world as well. And I had the honor of being ambassador during his first term. Of course, I had been governor for the state of Iowa for a long time. I was a strong supporter. I'm a Republican, of course, and I was a supporter of Donald Trump. My son was Trump's state director in his first two campaigns. And I also was the first American governor to host Xi Jinping. We had established in my first year as governor in 1983 a sister state with Hebei province of China, and Governor Zhang Zhiguang from Hebei came to Iowa in 1983 to sign that agreement. He invited me to bring a delegation there in 84. I was there for the 35th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic in October 1, 1984. And then in the spring of 1985, we had a delegation of 5 young men led by Xi Jinping, who at that time was only a county level party leader in Hebei province. And we had been treated so well in our visit to Hebei that we went all out to make him feel welcome and appreciated in Iowa. And as a result, Xi Jinping has still called me, not just me, but all the people he met in Iowa in 1985, old friends. And so we've stayed in touch, and that sister state has stayed active through all these many years.
Well, you're an old friend to Xi Jinping, which is, quite an honor, especially for an American. And you're a friend and political supporter, both you and your son Eric, of President Trump. We were talking a couple of days ago, Terry, about how you view this, and please remind me. But I think you viewed this as almost sort of two strong guys who are the only principals in their government when it comes to this U.S.-China relationship. who have some similarities to each other and who are sort of battling it out, trying to find the right equilibrium. And I'd like you to start there. I think we build this webinar as, how does Donald Trump think about China? And let me go back to that question. Based on your experience with the man and your experience representing our country in Beijing, how is Donald Trump thinking about China these days, beyond just the general art of the deal? Does
Well,
he find China threatening?
in
Please.
my first stint as ambassador to China, I guess my only stint as ambassador to China, I had two stints as governor, but in it was the year 2017, Trump came to China, and they had a state visit, and I also suggested that he bring business people with him and see if we could work out some trade deals, and they did. And then, of course, there were substantial negotiations that eventually led to the signing of the Phase 1 trade agreement in December of 2020. Shortly thereafter, of course, we had a worldwide pandemic with COVID, and that had an impact. But there's no question that trade agreement made a real difference. I'm the governor. I was a governor of an agricultural state, and we set records in terms of exports of soybeans, corn, pork, even beef and chicken to China during Trump's first go round. And consequently, I think he wants to improve on that. He wasn't totally satisfied that it was the agreement was good, but it wasn't great, and he wants to make it even better. And I think he also understands that to have an agreement that's going to work, you have to have feeling on both sides that it is beneficial. And so I think he understands the Chinese want something that would benefit them as well.
Well, that's a great segue. So take us into the room. What does Donald Trump think is a good deal? And let's go back to, again, that Phase 1 deal. The last time the US and China really came to a deal was one that you were, part of the negotiating team for. And sort of, how does Donald Trump prioritize his negotiations with China? So much has been made over just the raw numbers, just the deficit in trade of goods, and his desire to bring down the deficit in trade of goods. Is it that simple, Terry?
No, it's more complicated than that. Trump wants fairness and reciprocity, but he's also a realist. He understands that it's got to be something that the other side feels is also beneficial to them. And consequently, he comes on strong. And I think that's what he's done this time with the very significant tariffs. But he's already given an indication that those tariffs will come down, especially if he can get an agreement that he feels is going to be beneficial to the United States. And remember, his whole commitment is to improve jobs and income for American workers, especially people in the manufacturing and construction industry.
Well, that's a great point that, Donald Trump and some of his closest advisors, Peter Navarro at the sort of top of the list, have argued that these sort of protectionist policies are intended to rebuild or restore some of America's industrial capacity or manufacturing capacity, especially in the heartland. There are others on the Trump team who talk more about just sort of resetting the rules globally and certain non-tariff barriers, not just slashing the trade deficit, but finding accommodations with countries on non-tariff sort of anti-competitive measures in their view. You can't have it both ways, Terry. You can't say we're going to have these protectionist measures, we're going to keep them in place to rebuild America's manufacturing capacity. But what we really want to do is just sort of reset the relations and change the numbers and work on some of the non-tariff barriers. To me, my observation is there's a debate going on in the White House right now. But I'm interested in your take and sort of how does a president reconcile these two intentions, these two schools of thought, if you will?
I think it's a combination. I think he wants fairness and reciprocity in trade, and he recognizes that many countries, Europeans and many others, have had non-tariff barriers that have really been disadvantaged to the United States. I remember when I was governor, trying to sell food products and agricultural products in Europe was a real problem as well. And so he's interested in addressing those things as well. And I think part of it is um, he feels that China is the biggest challenge, but it's not the only one. And a lot of people feel that maybe he's taken on too much by looking at all the unfairness that he recognized been going on for decades in trade. But on the other hand, Donald Trump is a very ambitious guy, and he's already had significant success in getting uh, companies to indicate huge investments in the United States. And that's the bottom line. He says if they invest and create jobs in America, there's no tariff.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing he's looking at. And the companies are looking at what's the advantage of that. And I think that's where he's already had, I don't know, uh, $7 trillion in investments that have been um, announced. So, we'll see where that goes. But and just recently, he'll come on strong, but then he's a realist, and he's already backed off on, the tariffs we have on China right now are very significant, 145%. But he's already indicated that he's willing to reduce that substantially to try to get a better deal.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit, the sort of the practical side of Donald Trump. I don't expect you had a chance to look at it, Terry, but about 20 minutes before we started this webinar, the Wall Street Journal posted an article reporting, based on sources familiar with the situation, as they put it, that the White House is moving pretty quickly in the next day or so to even slash the tariffs that had been put on China on April 2nd, and some of the tariffs that were legacy tariffs from Trump's first term and that continued through the Biden term. And I'm wondering if these reports, are accurate. If you think this is President Trump reacting to the markets, the equity markets obviously have suffered greatly since the April 2nd Liberation Day announcement. The bond yield that is being watched so closely by the Treasury Department, the 10-year bill, because of the need to do a massive refinancing in June and July of U.S. debt, and of course more than sort of $20 trillion in debt to be refinanced over the course of the Trump second term. Are the markets acting as a check on Trump's more aggressive ambitions with regard to trade deficits?
Well, certainly the markets have reacted in a very negative way, but just in the last 2 days, just yesterday and today, they made a tremendous resurgence and comeback. And I think that's because of the signal that Trump has made that these initial tariffs on China are not the end of the day. And they're to get their attention and eventually to try to get a better deal. And he makes it a very big point that he personally likes Xi Jinping and he wants to work out a deal with him. So,
And in addition to markets sort of acting as a check on President Trump, there's been some politics around it as well, Terry. And I suppose no one knows agriculture better than you do. And I know it was a big part of the negotiation during your time running the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. How are farmers reacting to the potential trade war that would affect, I think, their largest foreign buyer of farm products, and that is China, especially so, I would think, with regard to Iowa's substantial soybean production?
You know, farmers and rural Americans have been Trump's strongest supporters. He's carried those rural counties by huge margins. And even though we went through some pain the first time around, he went out of his way to help protect farmers, provide subsidies, offset some of their reciprocal trade um, barriers that were put on us. And the result is that he's got a strong support among rural people. And I don't see that changing. And I think he's very cognizant of the fact that his policies, at the end of the day, need to be good for not only manufacturing, but for agriculture producers and people involved in construction and other industries.
Sure. Terry, I want to talk a little bit about China. China has changed, and it's changed even since you were in Beijing as our U.S. ambassador. Is it your sense that changes in China, especially with regard to their formidable investments in research and development and their ability to diversify some of their export-based economy, have changed the way the Trump team are looking at China?
Well, there's no doubt that China has made substantial progress, but they don't have the aggressive growth rate that they had before, and they have some debt issues too that they have to deal with. But you're right about the fact that China has worked very hard to position itself to be a real leader in both uh, production and in military and space exploration, all of this. So I think Trump recognizes that America is going to have to work very hard to maintain our leadership position in the world. And he wants to have China as a friend, but he also doesn't want China to surpass the United States.
Yeah, I know this is, of course, a big battle for primacy between the two largest economies in the world. I was lucky enough, Terry, to be part of a conversation just yesterday here in New York with the chief economist from DBS Bank. And he brought something to the group's attention that really has stayed with me. And I want to share it with you and get your reaction. And he cited to a study done by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. This is a group that looks at what they've identified as the 64 leading technologies in the world. This is, AI and clean tech and electric vehicles and advances in medicine and pharmaceuticals and aviation and the like. And by this sort of nonpartisan standard, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute concluded that while the United States was the leader, and I want to make sure I get these numbers right, between 2003 and 2007, during that period, the United States was the leader in 60 of those 64 technologies. No surprise, American research and development had led the world really, for much of the last 80 years since the end of World War II. But the striking finding was that in the period 2019 through 2023, which was sort of the last period in which they published the statistics, China is now the lead in 57 of those 64 technology categories. So it's been a complete sort of reversal in position. China's investment in research and development, much of which occurred, by the way, interestingly, during the COVID years, has allowed it to eclipse the West, eclipse the United States in almost all of these technology categories. That must be weighing on the Trump administration. And it's certainly something that's very interesting to us here at KraneShares because we spend so much of our time trying to understand tech companies in China. I'm interested in your reaction and maybe more importantly, your take on how the Trump team may be reacting to sort of China's closing the gap or maybe even eclipsing the United States in technology and research?
I think the Trump administration very much wants to see America #1 in those important categories, and feels that the American leadership in the last several decades has not done what it should. And that's one of the reasons I think he is pushing for tariffs and other um, barriers that will prevent China and other countries from taking advantage of us. And that's kind of the feeling that they've stolen technology and they've put in place tariffs and non-tariff barriers that have disadvantaged the United States. And they're trying to change that. However, how quickly you can do that is a question. And that's he's trying to do it very quickly. And obviously, he's running into some resistance domestically. But I think a lot of Americans feel that we want America to be #1.
Yeah,
And
there's no question. Look at America doesn't have a sole proprietorship on nationalism.
right.
I suppose every country around the world has its version of nationalism. But going back to this sort of question of how has China changed, and how does the Trump administration sort of alter their playbook, so to speak, to accommodate these changes? I think we have to consider the other countries. I noticed that Xi Jinping recently met with the leader of Vietnam. He is undoubtedly, China has had their struggles in international relations. It has not been their strong suit. The Belt Road Initiative, of course, had very mixed results and reactions from around the world. But I'm wondering if China's ability to strengthen relationships, not just with the countries in Southeast Asia, but maybe even take advantage of some of Europe's disaffection with American foreign policy, creates a sort of a special challenge for the Trump administration, and how they might sort of move back towards rebuilding those relationships in Europe in order to, again, put a check on the inroads that China seems to be making.
Well, and China has made a real effort to try to curry favor with countries in Africa and South America as well. And so that's something they've done in recent years. Part of it is, though, a feeling, especially with the Belt and Road Initiative, that a lot of the work has been done by Chinese workers and not indigenous or local, from the countries where they're doing the work. And so there's been a little bit of pushback on that. But China has become a very wealthy country, and they're willing to invest considerable money in other parts of the world, and much more than the United States today. So, they're not the developing country they used to talk about. They are now a very rich, highly developed country, and they're willing to spend money in the Belt and Road Initiative and other things to try to basically increase their influence and curry favor.
China, Terry, our view here at KraneShares is that this interdependence between the Chinese economy and the U.S. economy is irreversible. I like to say it's like gravity. You can't defy it for very long. And in fact, China has an interest in American economic success. The United States as a consumer market for Chinese products, of course. As you know from your governorship of Iowa, the United States as a producer of farm products to help, feed China and continue to feed the world. And the United States has an interest in Chinese economic success. As we all know, and they play an integral part in the global supply chain. Increasingly, China can be a market for U.S. Goods and services, not just agricultural goods, but other goods. I'm wondering, in this rhetorical this argument over fairness. Can the two sides, find a common definition of what is fair? And I ask you this because, as I said, if it had not been interrupted by COVID, that phase one deal that you helped negotiate probably would have developed into a broader accommodation between Washington and Beijing. Can we get those conditions back, or has China developed so much so since then that it'll be more difficult for us to find this sort of common definition of what is fair?
Well, nothing has been done since phase one. The Trump administration really points to the fact that Biden didn't do anything. There were no agreements worked out during the time that he was president. And so Trump is trying to make up for lost time. And he also is looking at not just China, but the rest of the world and saying, we've got to correct the areas where we've been taken advantage of, be it's intellectual property rights, access to the market in things like insurance, financial services, as well as agriculture goods. And I will say the Chinese people appreciate the quality and the safety of American food products. And we Americans appreciate the quality and affordability of the consumer goods that we get from China. So you are right. We are mutually interdependent, and it's important that we try to work out the differences.
But Terry, let's think about what Donald Trump is asking of China and other countries around the world, right? He's saying, buy more American products. He's saying, sell us less. He's saying, do not depreciate your currency. And then to countries other than China, he's saying, don't buy Chinese products. And I guess my question to you, and I know it's a hard question, but is Trump really asking too much of the world? Has the world changed in a way so that the Europeans, the Southeast Asians, forget about the global South for a second, because there are other issues associated with the global South, but are they more free agents now than they have been in the past? And does that create an opening for China? And I'll give you one example. As you travel the world, almost as soon as you leave the United States, you notice something right away. And that is that Chinese electric vehicles are everywhere. The BYD cars have, substantial market share in most European countries and Southeast Asian countries. You see the BYD automobiles everywhere. I had never even heard of BYD during the first term of the Trump administration. It was really a fledgling, almost considered like a startup company. Now they're everywhere. And I can give you other examples of Chinese products that are making big inroads in the global market, if not in the United States, outside the United States. How does Trump think about that? Does he worry about that? Is there really anything he can do about it? And does he run the risk of, engaging in a trade war with countries other than China and maybe even driving them closer to China and strengthening China's economic ties with every country around the world other than the United States?
See, I think we can compete effectively with China, not with electric vehicles, but with a renewable fuel. And we produce corn and soybeans, and we can, and frankly, in Iowa, our costs of energy has gone down, and we are looking at ways that we can sequester carbon to make it even better for the environment. And so I'm a big believer in renewable energy, and I believe that that is a better alternative than electric vehicles. Electric vehicles, you have problems. You got to get rare earth minerals. You have to dispose of the batteries. There's a lot of problems there. And although China is certainly become the world leader in that area, I believe that we can be effective by focusing not on trying to compete with China with electric vehicles, but on being the leader in renewable energy. And American consumers have kind of rejected the idea, especially those of us that live in rural America, of electric vehicles because you have to recharge them so often. And if you live in a big city, it might be so bad. But if you live in rural America, it's a disaster. And then if the weather turns bad and you have a cold snap, all kinds of issues come up with them. So
Sure.
I think we have an advantage that we need to build on. And I think the Biden administration made a big mistake by putting all this emphasis on that, on electric vehicles. And frankly, in places that have the most of them, like California, they they can't generate enough electricity to even use them.
Sure, sure. Terry, before we turn to the questions, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the numbers. And it's hard to follow because, with all respect, the executive orders come out, fast and furious these days. But, on many Chinese goods exported to the United States, the tariff rates imposed beginning in the first term, but sort of accumulating leading up to April 2nd of this year are in excess of 125%. And I think everyone understands that's not sustainable. That's not going to continue for long. And as I mentioned, in fact, there's talk even today in Washington, D.C., that there's going to be a slashing of those tariffs. Trump has blinked a couple of times now. He after April 2nd, he blinked, if you will, in reducing tariffs on countries other than China. Subsequent to that, there was a massive carving out consumer electronics from the tariffs that Trump had put in place on China. Now there's talk of bringing them down again. Where is this going? Trump seems to be sensitive to the markets, thankfully. Very sensitive to the bond market, as has been widely reported. Where's this going? Is Trump going to continue to make concessions? Is he going to demand a summit with Xi Jinping? Help us understand, based on your experience in the first term, what happens here? Because to many Americans, it feels like a little bit of a self-inflicted damage done to the U.S. economy. But I want your view.
Well, I think Trump looks at this as a transition. He wants the end result, a more fair and equitable trade situation, not just with China, but with the rest of the world. And he's already got over 100 countries that have indicated they want to try to work out a better deal with the United States. And already it looks like we're close to something with India, probably with South Korea, with Australia, with Japan. And consequently, I think that we will see over the next several weeks a number of these deals announced, and hopefully that'll put some pressure on China to reach an agreement with us as well. And Trump has indicated that the present tariffs with China are going to go down. How much, I don't know, but I think he wants to work out something. And he said real good things about Xi Jinping personally, and consequently, that's kind of the way he likes to operate, is if he can work out a personal deal. But I think we'll see some deals between other countries first, but hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll see something significant with China as well.
Yeah, and it's not just trade in goods. I mean, I think one thing that the Trump administration has left out of the conversation is trade and services. The United States, of course, is a huge exporter
Yep.
of services to China and around the world. Do you think that's deliberate? Was that part of the discussion in the first term? Why are services not part of the consideration when considering the trade deficit? Do you have
I
any
think
thoughts?
insurance and financial services, and those are very important. And we made a little bit of a progress on that in the phase one trade agreement, but I think a lot more can be done there. And China really needs that. Um, we have a company called Principal Financial Group that has tremendous um, products that can really help China with an aging population. And that makes a lot of sense. And hopefully that can happen in the trade that goes on.
Sure. Terry, another, I guess, aspect of this back and forth that we get asked a lot about at KraneShares is, there's always this talk about a delisting of Chinese companies, which, we follow extremely closely and have put strategies in place for purposes of protecting our investors and protecting our funds. But there's about $1 trillion in sort of US investment in Chinese companies that are listed on the exchanges here in New York. And sometimes you hear the more extreme elements in Washington and perhaps even the more extreme elements in the executive branch, talk about somehow delisting these Chinese companies. There wasn't much talk about that in the first term, other than the passage of the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act,
Right.
and the importance, and I think rightfully the importance for the SEC of ensuring that the proper accounting practices are followed by the accounting firms auditing these Chinese companies. But I'm wondering if you think there's a risk that this trade war is contagious and will move to capital controls or other types of issues that really don't relate to the trade in goods or the trade deficit.
I really think the most important thing, and I think progress has been made on this already, is to see that these Chinese companies have the responsibility to disclose the risks that American companies are required to do to be listed on the exchanges. And so we need to make sure that whoever is auditing those companies is doing what they need to do to see that there is disclosure and accurate information about their financial conditions. That's just common sense for
Yeah, sure.
we need to
Sure.
make sure the investor is protected. And as long as that's the case, I don't think there'll be a problem.
Well, that's very reassuring. I appreciate that very much. We, of course, agree. And sort of the requirements of the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act and the PCAOB standards are extremely important to us. And it sounds to me like your view is you have less concern that just this sort of trade war is going to spread to capital controls or moves to delist Chinese firms. Based on, things that don't relate to accounting principles, but rather relate to geopolitics.
Right. I think we need to protect the interests of investors. PCAOB is created to do that. And I think great progress has been made on that. The Chinese were reluctant at first, but I think they've come to the conclusion if they're going to do business here, they're going to have to make sure that the investors are given the information that they need so that they're not surprised. And in the past, in
Yes.
China, there have been situations where investors have been taken to the cleaners because they've not been given that information. But I think China has come to the understanding that if you're going to do international business, you have to do that.
Terry, I want to cover two more topics, hopefully pretty quickly before we go to the question and answer. And first, I want to revisit for just a second this issue of Europe and Europe becoming an increasingly important part of China's economic strength. I've got a slide here. I don't know if you can see it or not, Terry.
I see it. I see the red and blue.
The red and blue, and what that slide represents is really in part what's happened since you were ambassador in Beijing, and that is increasingly the map has been populated by countries that trade more with China than they do with the United States. And you can see that as there's more red in the map, that global trade in goods and frankly global trade in services increasingly is tilting towards China. And there are other numbers that sort of lead to this. And I want to focus on Europe in particular because there are three locomotives that pull the global economy, right? The United States is the biggest one. China increasingly is a big, important locomotive, but Europe is still one of the locomotives that pulls the global economy. And I think the Europeans are seen increasingly as free agents, if you will. Maybe not destined to become, best friends or allies with China, but as a result of the war in Europe, and the trade war, in part, that was launched against the Europeans initially, the Europeans are increasingly, I think, looking to China to strengthen economic ties. And if I could look at the next slide, I don't know if you can see that one or not, Terry.
Yeah.
And these will all be available on our firm's website after the webinar. We'll post them. But this just shows in several different categories, Terry, where America may not be quite as strong as it was during your time in the first term relative to China or relative to the world. You can see, American market cap is, still, dominant. 46% of global market cap is in the United States. We have the deepest capital markets by far in the world. We have sort of the world's leading companies dominating across the board. So that hasn't really changed much. Public debt, the U.S. is, relatively very heavily indebted country. 35% of the global public debt is American. GDP has remained pretty solid. America is still 25% of the global GDP, but it's this other category that you see that I think is quite interesting, and that is the trade in goods. And this may come as a surprise to many Americans, Terry, but the U.S. Accounts for only 11% of the trade in goods. The world is, the rest of the world, if you will, is 89% of the trade in goods. And I think, this all tells a story, and it tells a story that, maybe a trade war launched by the United States based on trade in goods may not be as impactful as it would have been in the first Trump term. And I'm wondering how Peter Navarro and others in the Trump administration, think about this issue, because I know that Beijing is well aware of the fact that they are the largest trading partner, especially trade in goods, for so many of the other countries around the world. And I'm wondering how do you think they're thinking about this? And is this what may ultimately cause Trump to find more of a compromise or more accommodation with the Chinese?
Well, I think there's no doubt that during the Biden administration, nothing was done and we lost ground. And I think Trump wants to make that up. And part of what he wants to do is get more of these countries to invest in the United States and to create jobs here, increase personal income for American workers. And that is something that has even the labor unions have liked. And consequently, that's kind of changed things. But I think it's also realistic to mention that it's going to take a compromise. We're not going to be able to force, based on the tremendous consumer market we have in this country, our will. But hopefully we can make significant progress. And that's the big question, is where that ends up. And I think Trump's a realist, that he wants something that will be a trade deal that'll be fair and equitable and reciprocal.
Let's go to some of the questions, Terry, because really the first question that's come in is, goes to that last subject I wanted to talk about, and that is, maybe again, take us inside the process, inside the room. What I'm taking from our conversation over the last 45 minutes is there's going to be a deal, that we can expect Trump's trade team to find a deal that, hopefully, both sides can consider to be a fair deal. But what's the sort of, how is that executed? What are the dynamics? Does Donald Trump pick up the phone and talk to Xi Jinping? How much is happening in the back channel today? Is there a summit meeting? Do both sides gradually take down their tariffs? How does it come about?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not sure that I can totally tell you what'll happen, but I think first of all, there'll be some movement that'll reduce the burden and an indication that we want a deal, and then we need a reciprocal response from the Chinese that shows that they have an interest in it. And we'll see. I don't know that there will be a deal, but I know that Trump would like to see one at the end of the day.
How did it come about during your time as ambassador during that first term when you
Well,
reached the phase one deal? Did you go into the Ministry of Commerce and start talking to them about it, or was it happening in Washington?
there
What was
were
the spark?
many, many meetings back and forth over several years. Xi Jinping appointed Liu He as his lead negotiator. Um, Donald Trump asked um, his trade negotiator was um,
Lighthizer?
Lighthizer and Mnuchin, but Lighthizer was the lead. And the
Right.
result was that they built a relationship and then had a very close to a deal. And then the hardliners in China said, no, that's too far. We're not willing to take off the subsidies of these state-owned enterprises, and it fell apart. But then eventually it came back together and it was signed in December of 2020. I was there in the White House when it was done. Um, I don't know if it'll happen that way again or not, but I think Trump wants it to happen quicker and not take years. So we'll see what happens. But I suspect we'll see movement within the next year.
Did American business leaders have a voice in the discussion?
Yes. In fact, when Trump came to China in the 2017, I encouraged him to work with the American business leaders and bring several of them there. And they did announce several deals at that time. And that was even before the overall trade agreement was worked out. So I would hope that there will be those kind of discussions with both agriculture and business leaders.
And is it your sense that today Trump is hearing from, business leaders, not just agriculture, but, business leaders in finance,
Yes,
Hollywood, Silicon Valley, every aspect of the U.S. economy has an interest in China.
absolutely. Yeah, and Trump is a pretty good listener, and he gets information from a lot of different sources. And consequently, the other thing that he's done is he built a relationship with labor and with construction and business leaders that's different than any other Republican. And I've seen in my state people that used to always vote Democrat are now voting Republican because they don't think the Democrats care about them, that they only care about, this the rich in the East Coast and the West Coast, and the average working guy in a factory or construction work here in middle America is kind of forgotten. And that's one of the reasons why Trump carried so many of these battleground states in the last election. And I suspect that, we've already seen um, the UAW even compliment him on some of his policies. And again, that's a very unusual uh, um, combination.
Yeah, look, I think, Trump going back to the first term when you were in the administration, has brought together strange bedfellows, if you will. Peter Navarro, his career was advising labor unions. He was, one of the original objectors to the North American Free Trade Agreement. And to his credit, he's been consistent throughout his career. And, it's interesting and, yeah, as you said, sort of strange that he would find himself in a Republican administration. But there it is. His policies line up with, I think, the longstanding and, to his credit, consistent views of Donald Trump. We're getting lots of questions. We're not going to be able to get to all the questions, but I do want to tell everyone who is participating, please submit your questions to info@KraneShares.com. And if I'm not able to pose the question to Ambassador Branstad, we will follow up with you. We'll either talk to Ambassador Branstad or have others on our team or his team respond to you individually. A couple of the participants, Terry, have asked a really basic question. And that is, if the world has changed, what leverage does the United States have to really bring China into the room for, a more favorable trade relationship? Maybe you can talk about how you thought about American leverage during your time as the U.S. ambassador in Beijing.
Well, America is still a very big market, and the Chinese have relied on us. And I don't know that they want to try to get by without the American market altogether. So the question is our market significant enough to get their attention? And I think it did in the first go round. I think we lost some ground during the Biden administration because no effort was made to try to reach an agreement or improve on the phase one agreement. But Trump is trying to go further and trying to make up for lost ground over a long period of time. And we'll see. And we'll see if this approach that, if you locate your business in America and employ people here, there's no tariffs. And already there's a number of companies that have said, yeah, I like that idea. I'm going to invest in the United States. So we'll see. That could make a real difference, and it could improve income and opportunities for a lot of American workers.
Yeah, I agree with you with regard to the American consumer. While we're only about 4% of the world's population, American purchasing power is, sort of 10x that of the purchasing power of those around the world, and many multiples or a few multiples of that of even the Europeans. And China can't move forward without access to the U.S. markets. The only question for you, and I think for the Trump administration, is how much pain is the Trump administration willing to inflict on the U.S. economy in order to maximize the leverage of access to the U.S. market for China?
That's a very astute question, because the Chinese are saying we can take a lot more pain. We've done that throughout our history, and we're willing to do it. But this generation of Chinese, I don't know, is willing to take as much pain as their parents and grandparents. So we'll see. But that's kind of their philosophy is, we're a country that's suffered a lot, and we're willing to suffer to get through this, to get our way.
Yeah, I think if you combine it with the fact that, Donald Trump's campaign, his winning campaign last year was, one of the main focuses was inflation and the cost of living, and promising American consumers and the ordinary sort of middle America people you referred to that he was going to address inflation. And I would say, 100 out of 100 economists agree that protectionist, tariffs on the trade and goods, present inflationary pressure. We can have a conversation about sort of how much would be added to inflation and other measures that could be put in place to offset that. But these are inflation causing policies, and I'm wondering, how closely does the president look at that, especially now that he's in his second term and he's not running for re-election?
Well, I think part of it is he believes that one of the big issues is the cost of energy, and that he's doing all we can to reopen America to energy dominance. And that's going to make a real difference. And it's already making a real difference with regard to Russia and other parts of the world that are so dependent on energy. And if America becomes really dominant and the cost of energy goes down, which it has already, could make a real difference. It varies across the United States. In the South and here in the Midwest, energy costs have already gone down. Less than $2.5 a gallon for gasoline. Some states has gone down to less than $2. Then you go to California and it's over $5. And consequently, you know, the economy is very different state to state, and it'd be real interesting whether they continue. The real issue, I think, becomes whether Americans are willing to forego certain pain in the short term in order to have a more prosperous economy in the long term.
And I think adding to that is, is Donald Trump willing to take the hit, if you will? Is he willing to, look Americans in the eye and say, I did this because this is in your long-term interests? Or is he sort of more closely attuned and sensitive to his own popularity? It's an open question, I think, and it's one we're going to see, play out probably over the next couple of weeks and maybe the next couple of months. Terry, we're very close to the 10 o'clock hour, and you've been very generous with your time. If you're willing to, I would love to have you, give us just a minute or two just to sort of pull out your crystal ball, sum up, sort of what you expect to happen, and maybe most importantly, what you're going to be looking for, what you're going to be watching most closely over the next coming weeks and months, especially with regard to U.S.-China trade, but even maybe more broadly with regard to the Trump foreign policy.
David, with Donald Trump, you need to expect the unexpected. He likes to keep people guessing, and I think that's what he's going to do. Already, we've seen just in the last couple of days an indication that he is not going to fire the person in charge of the Federal Reserve, and that he's probably going to reduce tariffs on China. And so that's already had a very big impact in just 2 sessions on the stock market. And the stock market is a reacting group, and I think that Trump is looking at the long term on that. And he's of the opinion that as we become the dominant player in energy, and if we are able to get significant investments in manufacturing and in other high-tech industries, that he's going to make America great again. And that's his goal. He wants America to be a great, prosperous, successful country, and he has a different approach towards things. Many of us had never looked at tariffs as a mechanism to get that done, but we'll see. And certainly, he's got a lot of countries that are now saying, "No, we're willing to sit down with you and see if we can make a deal." How quickly that can happen is a good question, but he's made it clear that, yeah, we're going to go through a transition and some pain in the short term, but it's going to be worthwhile in the long term. And I guess just depends about how quickly the long term comes.
Terry, thank you very much. This has been a fascinating conversation. As I said, there's maybe no one who knows these 2 men the way you do. You're a friend to Xi Jinping, you're a friend to Donald Trump, and you're a friend to KraneShares. And I'm very proud to call you my personal friend. So thank you very much for your time. I look forward to continuing the conversation here at KraneShares and hopefully at other programs going forward. I would be remiss, Terry, if I did not also congratulate you on the great work you do as the chairman of the World Food Prize Foundation. I think
thank you. That was an honor, and it's great that we're able to honor and recognize people They're doing great things to reduce world hunger and improve the quality of nutrition throughout the world. So
And
thank
thank you.
you. I've enjoyed that experience too.
Yeah, and we at the firm are very proud to support your efforts and the team at the World Food Prize in Des Moines. So thank you very much. There's some disclaimers, and we're going to put up on the screen some information to allow people to subscribe to China Last Night and some of our other blogs and electronic newsletters. And with that, I'll close out the webinar. Thank you again, Ambassador Terry Branstad. And thank you to everyone for participating in the webinar this morning.
Thank you.